When night falls and sound withdraws, the archive remains. The night is long, the air is still. Only what must continue, continues. Iron does not stay what it is. Left in air, in the presence of moisture, it changes, not quickly, not all at once, but steadily, at the surface first, and then inward, at the rate that the conditions permit. The change is not damage in any external sense. Nothing strikes the iron. Nothing corrodes it from outside. The change comes from within the material itself, from the tendency of iron atoms to form bonds with oxygen, a tendency that has always been present in the iron and requires only the right conditions to express itself. The conditions are almost always present. Air contains oxygen, air contains moisture. These two, together in contact with iron, are sufficient. No extreme of temperature, no unusual chemistry. Only the ordinary atmosphere and time, and the iron's own tendency to become something other than iron. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. At the surface of the iron, where the metal meets the air, something is already happening. The iron lattice, the crystalline arrangement of iron atoms that gives the metal its properties, terminates at the surface. The atoms at the outermost layer have neighbors on one side and open space on the other. This asymmetry makes them reactive. An interior iron atom is surrounded on all sides by other iron atoms held in a stable arrangement, bonded in every direction. A surface iron atom is bonded only inward. Outward, it faces the air, and the oxygen in the air, and the water vapor that the air carries. An oxygen molecule approaches. The surface iron atom and the oxygen atom form a bond, not through any decision. Through electrochemistry, the exchange of electrons between atoms whose outer shells are configured for exactly this exchange. Iron offering what oxygen is configured to accept. The bond forms. The iron atom is no longer purely iron. It is iron combined with oxygen, a new compound, an oxide, something that did not exist in the lattice a moment before. The iron atom has not gone anywhere. It has become something else in the place it already occupied. The lattice around it adjusts. The neighboring iron atoms shift slightly in their positions. The crystalline arrangement accommodates the change. The surface is no longer purely iron surface, but a mixture. Iron where no reaction has yet occurred. Iron oxide where it has. The boundary between the two is not a line. It is a gradient, a zone of partial transformation, advancing inward at the rate that oxygen can reach fresh iron to react with. The first oxide layer changes what comes next. Iron oxide is not iron. It does not conduct electricity the way iron does. It does not bond to oxygen the way iron does. It is a different material sitting on top of the iron, and its presence changes the conditions at the surface. Oxygen arriving now does not meet iron directly. It meets oxide first. Some of it diffuses through the oxide layer, moving through the gaps between the oxide's crystalline structure, finding the iron beneath, reacting, adding another layer of oxide below the first. Some of it reacts with the oxide layer itself, changing its chemistry, converting one form of iron oxide into another. The oxide is not passive. It participates in what happens next. The oxide layer is porous. This matters. A dense, continuous oxide layer would slow the reaction significantly. Oxygen would have to diffuse through a solid barrier to reach the iron beneath. But iron oxide as it forms naturally is not dense. It is voluminous. It occupies more space than the iron it came from, because the oxygen atoms added to the structure increase its volume. This expansion causes the oxide layer to crack, to separate, to form a surface that is rough and porous rather than smooth and continuous. Through those cracks and pores, oxygen continues to reach the iron. The reaction does not seal itself. It creates the conditions for its own continuation. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The surface changes color. What appears first is not red. It is a faint yellowing, a thin oxide layer, partially transparent, through which the iron's own color still shows. The layer is too thin to obscure. It only tints. It is the beginning of a record, not yet legible as such, a first annotation on the surface of the metal. As the layer thickens, the color deepens. Yellow gives way to orange, orange to the red-brown that is most commonly called rust, the color of iron oxide in its most common hydrated form. Iron bonded to both oxygen and water, a compound that forms in the presence of moisture as readily as it forms in the presence of oxygen alone. The red-brown is thick enough to obscure the iron beneath. It is no longer a tint. It is a surface in its own right. The color is not uniform. Where moisture was most present, in a crack, at a point where water collected and held, the oxide is thickest, deepest in color, most advanced in its transformation. Where the surface was drier, the reaction proceeded more slowly, and the color is lighter, thinner, less developed. The pattern of color across the surface is a map of moisture distribution over time, not a record of any single event, but an accumulation, the aggregate effect of every hour of humidity, every contact with water, every night when the air was damp and the surface held that dampness against the iron. The surface is legible, the language is color, the text is the history of the air that touched it. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. Below the surface color, the iron is still iron. The transformation has not penetrated deeply, not yet, not in the early stages of oxidation. The oxide layer is thin relative to the mass of the metal beneath it. An instrument pressed against the surface would find iron a millimeter below, iron 10 millimeters below, iron throughout most of the material's depth. The color at the surface corresponds to a layer of change that is, by any measure of mass, a small fraction of the whole. Yet the fraction grows, not quickly. The rate of oxidation is not constant. In the early stages, when the iron surface is exposed directly to the air, the reaction proceeds at its fastest. Fresh iron, unobstructed access, the full electrochemical tendency of iron for oxygen expressing itself without barrier. As the oxide layer thickens, oxygen must travel further to reach fresh iron. The rate decreases. The transformation continues, but more slowly, the oxide's own presence modifying the conditions under which the oxide forms. This is not equilibrium. Equilibrium would be a state in which the transformation had ceased, a balance between the tendency to oxidize and some countervailing force that stopped it. What is happening here is deceleration without cessation. The rate decreases, but the direction does not change. Given sufficient time, the oxide will penetrate further and further, until no fresh iron remains near the surface, until the material has transformed throughout its depth, until what was iron is entirely oxide. This is the endpoint the process is moving toward. It moves slowly. It does not stop. In the dark interior of the metal, far below the visible surface, iron atoms occupy their lattice positions as they have since the metal was formed. They are not yet in contact with oxygen. The oxide layer above them is a path that oxygen must traverse to reach them, and the traversal is slow, and they are far from the surface, and the night is quiet, and nothing reaches them yet. They are iron still. The arrangement that cooling from liquid produced, the structure that gives the metal its properties, they will wait in this arrangement for as long as the barrier above them holds, not forever. The barrier is not impermeable. It is porous and cracked and growing, adding to itself at the bottom where oxygen reaches iron and reacting at the top where the atmosphere reaches oxide. The iron atoms at depth are not in danger in any urgent sense. Time is long, the rate is slow, but the direction is fixed. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The interior iron does not know what is happening at the surface. There is no knowing in metal. There is only the lattice, and the atoms in it, and the bonds between them, and the conditions at any given location. The presence or absence of oxygen, the presence or absence of moisture, the electrochemical potential that determines whether a reaction proceeds. The interior iron is iron because the conditions at its location have not yet permitted it to become otherwise. When the conditions change, it will change. Not because it was waiting, because the conditions will have arrived. Consider the iron over years. The oxide layer that was thin in the first months is now substantial. Color has darkened, layered, differentiated. Older oxide beneath, newer oxide above, different forms of iron oxide in different strata. Each layer a record of the conditions at the time it formed. The surface is no longer smooth. It is rough with the texture of transformation, the physical consequence of the volume expansion that cracking caused, the topography of a surface that has been continuously reorganizing itself as each new layer of oxide formed and cracked and was partially replaced. Moisture has collected in the crevices of the rough surface and accelerated the reaction there. Where the surface is deepest in texture, the oxidation is deepest in penetration. The topography of the surface and the depth of the transformation have reinforced each other. Roughness creates collection points for moisture. Moisture accelerates oxidation. Oxidation creates roughness. The surface has developed. It is not the surface it was. It retains the geometry of the original iron, the same overall shape, the same dimensions at scales larger than the oxide layer, but its surface character is entirely transformed. What was metallic is now mineral. What was smooth is now textured. What was one material is now two, the iron within and the oxide without, the boundary between them advancing inward at the rate the conditions permit. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. There is something in the color of rust at night. In daylight, the red-brown is vivid. The iron oxide absorbs the blue and green wavelengths of white light and reflects the red and orange, and the result is the color that has come to mean age, exposure, time. In low light, the vividness reduces. The color becomes darker, less saturated, the red-brown deepening towards something closer to earth, to soil, to the colors that come before color in the failing light. The surface is still transforming. Darkness does not pause the oxidation. The reaction requires oxygen and moisture, not light. The night air carries both. The surface continues its slow transaction with the atmosphere, the same transaction that has been proceeding since the iron was first exposed, the same exchange of electrons between iron and oxygen that produces oxide one molecular layer at a time. In the dark, the transformation is invisible. In the dark, everything that is happening below the threshold of perception. At the scale of atoms, at the rate of chemistry, in the space between the iron lattice and the oxygen molecule, in the moment of electron transfer that converts one into the other. The eye cannot follow this. The ear cannot follow this. What the night holds is the silence above a transformation that does not require observation. The record is being written now. The surface is different from what it was this morning by a layer of oxide thinner than light can distinguish. By morning, it will be different again, by the same imperceptible amount. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The iron over decades is a different object from the iron of its first exposure. Not in its geometry. The overall shape holds. The dimensions at scale are preserved. The object is recognizable as the same object, but in its surface character, in its composition at depth, in the properties of its outermost material, it has been replaced. The iron that was at the surface 10 years ago is now oxide. The iron that was a millimeter below the surface is now at or near the surface, newly exposed, beginning its own transaction with the air. The iron that was 10 millimeters down has moved, relatively, closer to the boundary. Every layer of iron that becomes oxide brings the next layer into contact with the conditions that will transform it. There is a kind of patience in this, not the patience of waiting. Patience implies awareness of the interval, a held readiness for what comes next. What the iron has is not patience. It is simply the property of changing slowly, of requiring time for the conditions to act, of transforming at the rate that diffusion and chemistry permit, rather than at the rate that any intention might demand. The slowness is not restraint. The slowness is the rate, and at this rate, the change is total. Given what the iron is made of and what the air contains, and the direction that electrochemistry moves in, the transformation is not a possibility. It is a trajectory, a path already determined by the nature of the materials in contact. Time does not decide the outcome. Time only determines when the outcome arrives. Breath enters, breath leaves. Between breaths, the air holds its density. The iron rests in this room. What it holds is not a record it chose to keep. The oxide layer on its surface is the physical consequence of chemistry, the accumulated result of every moment since the iron was first exposed to air, compressed into a layer of transformed material that is both the record and the change itself. The record and the change are the same thing. The oxide is what the reaction produced, and the record of the reaction is simply the oxide. Its thickness, its color, its texture, its depth of penetration into the iron beneath. Nothing was stored intentionally. Everything that is there because it could not be otherwise. Outside, the air moves at its own pace. Oxygen is present in it, as it is always present. Moisture is present in it, more or less depending on the night, depending on the season, depending on what the day brought and what it left behind. The air reaches the surface of the iron and the transaction continues. The same transaction, the same chemistry, the same slow exchange that has been proceeding since the first moment of exposure. The iron is becoming what it is becoming. Not all at once, not tonight. Over time, at the rate that the conditions permit, in the direction that the chemistry requires, without decision and without pause, the iron and the air are completing a transaction that began the moment they met and will not be finished until one of them is gone. The air will outlast the iron. This is already known, is written into the nature of the reaction, is the endpoint towards which the slow transformation has always been moving. The iron will become entirely oxide, given sufficient time, and the oxide is stable where the iron was not, and the transaction will be complete, and what was iron will be mineral, and the mineral will hold the shape the iron held, and the shape will be all that remains of what the iron was. That ending is far. Tonight the iron is still mostly iron, the oxide still a surface condition, the transformation still a fraction of the whole. The room is still. The air touches the surface. The record grows by one more layer, too thin to see, too slow to feel, present as the increment it is. One more moment of a transaction that has no urgency, no deadline, no force behind it other than the ordinary tendency of iron in air to become in time something other than iron. The transaction does not announce itself. It does not require witness. It proceeds at the pace of chemistry in the dark, as it proceeds in every interval, observed or not. True wisdom cannot be captured in words. It is found only in the silence between them. When night falls, the archive remains.